maybe crooked facings aren't as bad as an earthquake, but as soon as the shaking stops, I'll get up and see if I can explain it to you, because it can be as devastating on your playing mechanics behind your nose as an earthquake can be to a whole city. Crooked facings, or asymmetrical facings, make it almost impossible to balance the reed well to a high degree. And because the reed is twisting on the facing, because it basically is trying to compensate for two resistances, not one, because the reed is twisting on the facing, it will actually force you into beginning to bite and do things you shouldn't have to do to make the response work and to clarify the sound. And this is a disaster. This is a disaster for your playing mechanics behind your nose. So symmetrical facings are so much easier to balance reeds with, and you get a dependable, even response all the way up. See, the problem with crooked facings is that you get an uneven response. You know, some people say, I like more resistance in the mouthpiece. Some people say, I like less resistance. But much more important than more or less resistance is that the resistance be even. You may like something to blow against. Well, vaya con Dios. But let's say that as you're blowing, say, from the low register to the middle register to the high register, you encounter different resistances and different responses in each one of those registers, and especially at different dynamic levels. Then you're going to be moving all over the place behind your nose to try to produce a consistent color, a consistent focus, and a consistent, predictable response. This is a disaster. And for whatever one might be trying to attain in some limited way with crooked-facing mouthpieces, there's so much that you sacrifice that the sacrifice is not worth it. And especially since you don't have to make that sacrifice, you can achieve a beautiful balance between all these things, between tone color and response and flexibility and clarity and a depth in the sound. You can produce a beautiful balance of those without going to such extreme and without laboring so much behind your nose. So I don't recommend crooked-facing mouthpieces or asymmetrical mouthpieces. I think they're essentially a wrong road to travel. And many players I know have traveled that road and realized what they've encountered has not worked for them over a long period, trying it really hard, trying to give it a chance, and they've abandoned it. I remember one of the famous professional clarinet players that I worked with, a gentleman whose name you would recognize if I mentioned his name, but I don't have his permission to mention his name. He said, I was playing these crooked-facing mouthpieces, and until I stopped and I learned to balance reeds on symmetrical facing mouthpieces, I had no idea how hard I was working. So it's very, very important to get a beautiful symmetrically faced mouthpiece with a nice centered tip. And so then whatever facing curve, long, short, or tip opening, open or close, whatever you use, you're going to be able to predictably balance reeds so that you can play with predictable control, color, and shape, and so on and so forth. So that's a big message that you can take away from this particular presentation. The next thing we're going to talk about is the mouthpiece window. And the mouthpiece window affects resistance and response quite a bit. The larger the mouthpiece window is, the more responsive the mouthpiece will be, the freer it will blow, and also the more sound that you can get out of the mouthpiece. People want a big sound. They think, I want a big open tip mouthpiece. That will not give you a big sound. If you want a big sound, you need a big window in the mouthpiece. But there is a law of diminishing returns. The bigger that window, of course, the quicker the response, the clearer the sound, and the more the volume. But if your mouthpiece is not designed to sort of compensate for that large window, then you're going to lose the center in the sound. So you're going to see a degrading of the center and also a degrading of stability in the pitch, color, and shape because the mouthpiece window is too large. You can take a mouthpiece with two identical facings, exactly same tip opening, exactly same facing curve, and enlarge the window on one, and it will blow much freer than the other, even though the facing curve and tip opening are exactly the same. So the window has a very profound effect on the response of the mouthpiece and on the resistance of the mouthpiece. And a lot of times when you have a mouthpiece that has a good facing curve, but it still is just a little bit stuffy as a mouthpiece maker, you can enlarge the window. If the interior design holds the center of the pitch, color, and shape very well, then you can enlarge the window and get that comfortable resistance that you want. So that's very, very important. Now there's one final consideration about the facing of the mouthpiece and how it affects resistance and response, and that is how thick the side rails are, and especially how thick the tip rail is. Now, a lot of people like a tip rail with a little more meat, we'll say, a little thicker, a little wider. And it's not altogether a bad idea, especially if the mouthpiece is well made in every other respect, because that thicker tip rail can produce darker sound and can warm up the sound, damp some of the highs, and help reduce some of the brightness and edge in the upper register. So far, so good. But again, if you go to extremes, you hit the old law of diminishing returns, and the thick tip rail can be very, very damaging to the response. If it's too thick, then you'll find there will be a sluggish response, and especially when you try to play softly, you won't be able to make the reed speak very well at the softer dynamic levels. You'll have to work, again, much too much behind your nose as you hit those lower dynamic levels to keep the sound going. So, again, most features, most things you can do with a mouthpiece will give you something positive. Wider tip rails, wider side rails, all those things will give you something positive. But if you go to an extreme, or if these things aren't balanced out by other features in the mouthpiece, they're going to create problems, and problems that are going to frustrate you constantly. So that's why it's always important to basically, in the mouthpiece recipe, to have it extremely well balanced, so nothing in the mouthpiece has to go to certain extremes in order to achieve something that you want to achieve. The thing that will help you more than anything else is to grow intellectually and to grow musically and to grow in your understanding of the technical things about equipment, so that you can achieve a more balanced view. It's very common for young players who are developing to get myopic. They want a certain kind of response, or if they want a certain kind of sound, they want a certain kind of color, and they get myopic and they begin to do things that basically are stupid things that cause them to sacrifice many other things that are equally important, and they have to work much, much too hard to play the clarinet. There's no need for that. Have a balanced view of the clarinet, have a balanced view of the sound, have a balanced view of musically what you want to do and technically what you want to do, and your equipment will begin to, say, conform to those things, and you won't find any really extremes in any of that. If you want a good concept, go listen to Harold Wright play. Anything you listen to Harold Wright play, you have a great idea about what the clarinet really can sound like in the hands of a great artist who has a beautiful, balanced view of all the wonderful things about the clarinet sound. So that's my advice to you on clarinet mouthpiece facings, and I hope from this talk and from some of the images that we've shown you here, you can get an idea of how mouthpiece facings affect the sound and affect the response and the resistance. And it will help you make, and if you take the information to heart, it's going to help you make better choices. And that's the whole point of learning about equipment. we're not done with the mouthpiece. We still have one more segment to go, and that is the segment that I might call Materials and Intelligent Design, and we'll be talking about that next time in the Mouthpiece Revealed. If you have suggestions for future discussion topics or have questions, please contact Tom at sales@ridenoirclarinetproducts.com.